really hard. Where's John, Kara? Where? Asleep?
Yeah.
I told Celeste.
My dad's.
No, let Allison hear it.
My dad's.
Mom, anytime you're ready.
You're ready, waiting on
My
you.
dad's. My dad's.
Well, the story that your mother's talking about is when I was a little girl.
That's my
I
dad's.
don't know if I'd been as old as Alice or
My
not.
dad's?
Might have been. But anyway, I had a shoebox.
Are we doing?
And I had a cute little doll in it, just a little one. It was made out of celluloid. You know what celluloid is? It's kind of a soft, kind of like plastic, only if you pushed on it very hard, it would make a dent, and then it wouldn't come back out unless you took a needle or a pin or something. And I just took such good care of that little doll. And my mother had given me some little pieces of cloth so that I could make it doll dresses. And she'd give me a little pair of scissors, and I had some thread, and I just loved to sew dresses for that little doll. My mama was sick in the bed, and she had a new baby by her, and my daddy came in the house, and he said, I think it's time you put that stuff up and help your grandma fix some supper tonight. And I said, well, I'll be through in just a minute. And he says, well, just a minute, and then you get busy, and you get those potatoes peeled for grandma, because she was there helping with my mother and the little baby. Well, my daddy went outside, and he stayed outside for quite a while doing some chores, and he came back in, and guess what I was still doing? I was still playing with my little doll, and I was still sewing. My dad says, well, I thought I told you to put that up and help your grandmother get this dinner ready. And I said, I will, and my grandma had said, well, you go ahead and just finish that little dress if you want. She'd said that first. She says, and I'll keep going on it. And I said, well, Grandma said I can just do a little bit more. And he says, I said you're supposed to put it up and help Grandma. And we had a coal stove, and it had big lids on it. And you put wood and coal in to make it get hot. My daddy just took the lifter and took the lid off that stove, and he stuffed my doll down in that box, and he shoved him right into the stove. And he says, that's that. Now when I tell you to do something, I mean for you to do it. And so this story has even another sad ending. I felt so bad, I cried, and I cried, and I cried, and nobody could make me feel any better. And so after the supper dishes was all done, and Grandma had got my mother and little baby all settled down for the night, Grandma said, come and let's go for a walk over to Aunt Mita's, because my mother had a sister that lived close. She says, come and you walk with me. And she asked my dad if it was all right, and he says, yes, that's all right. So we put on our boots and our clothes, and we started to go over there. And we went over and visited for a little while, and then we headed home. And on our way home, my grandma got too close to the ditch, and she fell in. She got soaking wet with water, and it was winter time, and there was snow and ice all over. And we had to pull Grandma up out of that ditch, and then we had to walk home. And then we laughed and joked, because that's the way Grandma was. She was a jolly person. And when we got to the house, she says, now you go in the house ahead of me, and you get them all interested in doing something else. And she says, and then I'm going to slip in the back and get into some dry clothes. So I went in, and they asked me how Aunt Nita was, and I says, just fine. Well, where's Grandma? I said, well, she's coming in just a minute. And they all turned and saw Grandma with dripping clothes going in the bedroom to change. That's...
Was this Grandma Abel?
Mm-hmm. Grandma Abel.
She didn't want him to know that she'd fallen.
Oh, she didn't want anybody to know she'd fallen in the ditch.
Oh, dear. Well, I bet you could just tell us dozens of those kind of stories.
My book.
Thank you, Grandma.
Can I see that?
Uncle Farrell, do you have a story that you could tell about?
I think we ought to have Albert first.
Dad, would you be willing to share a story from your dad and Mom, or your growing up?
Well, I've told this from
Guys.
several times to some of the grandkids. we moved to Honeyville when I was 6 years old. And down to, we lived in Ogden, west of Ogden, and my grandfather, Stratford, was on the president of the school board. And he said, because my birthday was on the 4th of September, he said I wasn't old enough to go to school. So they listened to him, and I didn't start school. And we moved, in February, they moved to Honeyville. And of course then I didn't go to school. So next fall when school started, I had a hard job getting over to Honeyville. We didn't have cars. We didn't even have an automobile. All we had was, I think, 4 horses that we used to work. And one of them they would often put on a buggy, and if we need to go to town, they put it on the buggy and drive that to town. Didn't have a top on it, it was just an open buggy. And getting from Honeyville to school was 3 miles. And so you can guess I didn't get to school very often. Well, I think it was in November, Thanksgiving time. Thought, no. My grandpa Bingham came up to visit us. He had a car, a Studebaker. Of course, it had it was looking around the side, it had a top on it. And they had the side glass. I guess Farrell, Mom remembers it. Put things around the side to keep the cold out a little bit. It was still cold in there. And he says, well, let him come down and live with him and go to school down there. And the school bus, seemed like to me it was an old bus. Kind of a long, and that's what we got in to go to school. So I went down there that winter and went to school down to west of Ogden in Wilson Lane, and finished my first grade down there. The next year I had to start walking to school.
So what grade was that? 2nd grade then?
2nd grade, we had to walk from where Grandpa lives up to that road up there. There about where Tom and Julene and them live. That's where we walked. And, I tell you, that was quite a walk.
So where was the school?
Honeyville.
Where it is now?
Where it is now, I believe.
You're kidding. That is a long ways.
Especially in the winter time.
What is that, 2 or 3 miles? We'd catch a
Oh.
bus
At least
to
2 miles.
Hack up there.
Oh, okay. That's where you had to go to get the bus.
Tom, lest
Just the
these
hack
children
with
get the idea
2
that
horses
my father was
pulling in a-
really mean, I want to tell one more story.
An old covered wagon.
ABCs. Okay?
I don't know that I'd ever heard that, Daddy.
You haven't?
X,
Well, I'll tell you, that is some real.
K,
Good.
R,
I'll tell you what.
wait,
This is in the,
Y,
yes, it was in the fall of the year.
Q, a T,
There used to be 2
R, a
railroads
T,
run up through Honeyville. One of them was electric, and it only had, it usually only come with 1 car. It was a passenger car, and it would come up every morning about 8 o'clock. And me and my brother Earl
would be walking up there to school. And we had to go down, get over the one railroad, go down through a low spot and up to the other one. And then down a little ways down the railroad track was a path off down this way. Otherwise, you went straight over, you might run right into where that spring comes, the water comes out of the tracks, you know, where the Crystal Springs water comes out of the track. So you just go down the track a little ways and go off. And Grandma, she was sitting over there with her eagle eye watching us. She couldn't see everything that was going on. And I was in the lead, and I got up onto the railroad track and looked down the railroad, and here come that electric car. And I knew I had time to run down that path. So I hollered at Earl and I said, "Get off of the road track, here comes the train." And he got off, didn't even come onto the track. I run down the track, got off and went, the train went by. Grandma was over there watching, and she couldn't see us. And she thought, sure as heck we got run over. She goes clear up into the field where her father was working, doing something. And told her, go over there and see what happened to them two. Father says, well, if they'd have got run over, the train would have stopped. And it didn't stop.
How would it stop?
Well, thank you, Dad. Mom, do you want to tell part two?
Just so you don't think that my daddy was a real mean man, because he wasn't. He was a loving and kind daddy. But the thing of it was, he wanted us to learn to obey. He just knew that we wouldn't be happy in our lives if we didn't learn to obey and do things when we were told to do it. Maybe he was a little too harsh that night, but most of the time he wasn't. And when I was just a little tiny girl, my daddy built a box, and he put it right onto his harrows and his levelers, whatever they call those things, floats, all the machinery. And whenever my mother would have to go to primary or something, why, she'd send me out in the field, and my dad would take me in that little box and work with him in the field all day and watch over me. And when I'd come home, why, I'd be just one big dust box. And he bought me some little bib overalls like he wore, and got some for Uncle Reed, the same thing. And then the two of us would go with him, and I've got pictures of us in those overalls now. Reminds me of it, but he was good and he was kind, but he just was so aggravated. And of course, with Grandma, she was overly kind, because I'll do your work if you know, just to make us happy. And of course, that sure taught me a lesson, that after that, when he said move, I moved.
You learned to obey. Well, Uncle Farrell, did you have some of those little bib overalls too?
I did. Yes, ma'am. I never wore anything but that year round, except on Sunday until I went to high school.
Is that right?
Yeah.
High school.
Farrell, tell them about the time that you had those old ugly shoes. Wasn't it you that had those ugly shoes and Mother told you to smile and nobody could see your face? Or was that all?
That might have been all. Well, you kids come over here and I'll tell you, I want to show you a scar here on my hand, then I'll tell you how I got it. See that scar right there? That little white line? Scar? See that little scar? Okay, now you go sit down and I'll tell you the story. When I was just a little boy, Ruth will remember it well, Brother Hall came by. I would have been about 5 years old. And he came by with what I said was a truckload of Shetland ponies. But Reed says there were only 3. But anyway, he stopped and he wanted to sell Dad one of them. And I remember Dad traded him an old worn out milk cow and a weaner pig for the Shetland pony. He was only about 18 months old, just stood about that high, just a little bitty thing, a sorrel one. A sorrel's sort of a red and white mixed. And Dad took him off of the truck and just piddling around there, made a little bridle for him and put it on him and sat Reed on him. Reed was just 6 years old, as I remember. And J.P. Christensen was about 14, and he came riding on a big horse on a gallop. And nobody was holding on to the pony, the little Shetland, and he took off right along the side of this big horse. And Reed stayed with him and didn't ever fall off, and turned around and brought him back. And my mother said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to name him. He doesn't run, he flies. His name is Bird. Well, he was a smart little horse, and we used to, well, this has nothing to do with that, but when he'd get all foxed up, you couldn't slow him down with a bit or anything. I mean, especially if you were heading for home, he knew when you were on the stretch towards home, you couldn't slow him down for anything in the world. And I was coming down from the north, and we had a clay driveway, and it rained and it was wet. And sometimes we thought it helped that if he wouldn't slow down but a bit, we'd get up and talk in his ear and say, Bird, cut out this nonsense and slow down. And I talked in one ear and that didn't help, and in the other one, and I knew we would never make that turn if he didn't. I had an old saddle, and all of the leather was off the horn, so there was just the steel horn up there. And I was hanging on for dear life, and we didn't make it. We made one complete roll, and that's where the horn went into my hand.
Oh. Did you have stitches?
No, we never went to
No
doctor.
stitches.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But another one of the, Ruth maybe remembers that we didn't have much money, and I'm sure Albert was the same way. Christmas was usually, they set out chairs like this in our living room, you remember, Ruth, and when we came down, after we had an upstairs, you maybe had one thing, which was yours, and maybe a new shirt that Mother had made. And one thing we did always have a lot of was unshelled peanuts and hardtack candy. That was one time in the year when we got our fill of.
Maybe an orange.
Yeah, maybe an orange. Well, it was during the Depression of the 30s, and we just didn't know that we were going to get anything that Christmas. And Dad found somewhere an old motorcycle sidecar, a red one, that was in real good shape, and he'd bought it and hadn't let us kids know about it and put sleigh runners under it. And this little Shetland stallion was just as quick on his feet as he could be. And the highway in front of home, they didn't grade all the snow off of it then. They'd pack hard and you could sleigh on it for several months during the winter. And this little Shetland being so quick on his feet there on Christmas Day, we took turns at taking him down the road just as tight as he could run, and then turn around, and we contested to see who could spin the greatest number of times before we took off up the road again. That was one Christmas that I particularly remember.
About how old were you?
Oh, I'd have been maybe John's age.
12? And you were what, about 14, 15?
And then one other Christmas I remember so well, or three Christmases I remember so well, that was one of them. And the other one, I'd have been preschool. And we'd gone to town, our whole family. Just as you get in your van to go, we went in a bobsleigh with the team to Tremont, and just before we got to Tremont, we had an old mongrel dog called Maggie. Do you remember it, Ruth? And she ran out in front of a car and got killed. And so we came home, and they had gifts. You know how parents would do quick cry and try and get us all stopped crying. And Santa Claus was coming tonight. When they just get us quieted down, and all in unison crying, I don't want that, I want Maggie. I remember that so well. And the other one that I remember so well is, gosh, I don't think I had to be a little bigger than her, but I remember hearing Mother had an old foot pedal sewing machine going 90 miles an hour Christmas Eve, and we knew she was making something for us. And she made that night out of old burlap bags, big cowboy chaps for reading me. All Christmas Day we had cowboy chaps on and rode stick horses.
They were cute too. She made them out of burlap.
Yeah, frilled them and all.
The ruffles, you know, down the side. And then she starched them stiff so they were just like
How many boys and girls were there in the family?
8 boys and 4 girls.
Mother, what about, I hope I have this story right, a Christmas that you had when money was really scarce? And didn't somebody bring a little red wagon and you never
During
did
the
find
night,
out?
we never did know who brought it. But it was that same night that the dog was killed.
Is that when Maggie was killed?
It was the same night because we went to bed sobbing and crying because they heard the door open quietly in the night and they wondered if the dog hadn't really been killed, if it had come up and come home and worked its way into the house. Or at least that's how they told us when they found out that it was this little red wagon with some toys in it.
And
I
you
think
never
we
did know?
suspicious Uncle Victor, didn't we? Victor brought it.
Who
We
was
never
Uncle
did know.
Victor?
That's Aunt Betty's husband, that's Dad's oldest
Okay.
sister.
Oh, is that, okay.
Vera's
Okay,
mother,
okay,
Yeah.
that's what I was.
Vera Hunsaker's.
Bernice, is there a favorite Christmas that you remember down here in the South? Since we're down here, we need to have a good Southern Christmas too.
Well, my Christmas is about like theirs, I think. When I was a little girl, we didn't receive very much for Christmas either. And when Ruth was telling about the coal stove, reminded me of one Christmas I got a ball, just a little ball, and a doll. And we had a wood stove. We didn't burn coal, we just burned wood in it. And when I got through playing with the ball that morning, I just, for some reason, put it on top of this stove. And pretty soon we smelled this awful smell. And it was my ball. By the time we got in there, it was just a half of a ball left. And I was so sad because I only had that and the doll, and that's all I got. But at least I was happy that I still had my doll.
And a half a ball.
And a half a ball.
Well, Mom and Dad, could you just relate maybe the birth of of Marva, and anything that you recall from Marva's birth or childhood?
Don't tell anything embarrassing.
Well, I'll tell you, from the minute we found out that we had a new baby coming, after we'd had all 7 of those boys, we were sure hoping we'd have a little girl. And I'll tell you, when the doctor said I had a little girl, we were mighty excited. And so, of course, Dad went home and told the kids that we had this new baby. And one of the neighbor girls found out about it. And when Barbara and Annette got to school and wanted to share the news, it was all over the town that we'd had a baby girl. They didn't even get to brag about it. They were so tickled about it. But we were delighted because that's why she was named Marva. We about named her Marvelous because it's so great. But she was just a little doll, such a sweet little baby. And, everybody just idolized her. We tried to spoil her, I think, rotten, but she seems to have come out pretty good. But she was really an active little girl. I see Kara, and that's just Marva all over again. She wanted to be right in the middle.
I said she got it from you.
Oh, from your side.
Didn't she? She just wanted to be right in the middle of everything. She could do anything that Barbara and Annette could do, and she just had to be right in the center of things.
There was a lady that hospital. Her name was Billy Clements. And
Yeah, you should tell us.
them two started acting like clowns in the hospital.
Well, she hadn't had any little boys, and she was tickled to death to get a boy, and I was to get a girl. And Halloween came along. Go ahead.
And so they dressed up, took the sheets off the bed, put them around them, draped them around them, and they went around to the rooms treating.
We took the paper bags that they used to pin on the side of the bed, you know, for the mothers, and we made us some masks out of that. And we saved the sack, so we had a trick-or-treat bag, and we had taken those sheets and put around us, and after everything was kind of calmed down while we went through the maternity ward trick-or-treating. And Dad, Grandpa here, had a cousin that was in the hospital. And we went into her room, and her mother had just brought her a box full of homemade candy. And of course, Billy was even more of a tease than I was. And so Billy says, well, if you haven't got something you'll give us, we'll just take this box of candy. And boy, Beverly started to cry. Oh, she said, that candy, my mother brought that to me. You can't take that candy. And so Billy finally gave it back to her. But we did. We got quite a few treats, you know. The husbands had been in to see the mothers, and we went home and went back to our room and put the beds back together and got into bed. And the next morning when the doctor came in, he says, I understand that you had some trick-or-treaters through the hall up here last night. And I said, oh, is that right? He says, I think so. Yeah, so she comes by some of her nonsense, I guess.
You saying you were so glad to get a girl made me think of Becky, our youngest. She had a girl first, Abby, and then a boy while we were on our mission. Oh, Ross is hyper, and he makes so many friends at church and all, but he does crazy things. He was giving these a talk, one of his first talks in junior Sunday school, and he was showing pictures of the prophet. And Becky, he didn't quit. She tried to stop him. Said, "Go away! I'm going to show them all." But he's that way. And when their last baby, the next one came. The next one was due. No, they had a girl, and then the next one was due. It's a baby now, last January. And came January 30th, wasn't last year. But anyway, Becky and one of her real good friends were both due with their babies. And wondered who was going to have first. And Becky told her friend, she said, well, if you call and I pick up the phone and I can't talk, or I'm crying, you'll know it was another boy.
So was it?
No, it was a girl. But Ross, he's a sweet little boy now, more doing better. But I'll go over and see him and ask Becky and say, where's Ross? He said, back in his room. I go back there and open the door and say, hi, Ross. He said, I don't want to see you. You're waving me out of his room. I was telling his other granddad, he said, don't worry about it. He does me the same way. Just a character, and she didn't want another one. If it's another, if I can't talk or I'm crying, you'll know it was a boy.
This lady that was mom wasn't a member of the church.
No.
And
Me,
my dang, through our mom's influence, and I guess I had something to do there, she joined the church. Her husband was a member, but I don't think he was very active.
Well, she was a man, but they had never been married in the temple. And he was visiting with us and everything. Right, as soon as they were able, they went through the temple and we went with them. And they had the children. She's still a very dear friend. She is a nurse to the doctor I go to now.
And they know Uncle Bill's family real well. They went to Bolivia with him.
Wasn't their son the one that you were supposed to marry all these years?
Oh,
Yeah,
that
when
was
Marva
just-
was little, she and Albert had it all figured out. They were going to be
We
married.
didn't we have our wedding program? I just
Yes,
remember
it was all
somebody was
written
going
up.
to sing 77 Sunset Strip. I cannot remember, but it was a show on TV and we just thought it had the jazziest
It
tunes.
did, yeah, I remember that.
And somebody was going to sing that at our wedding.
Yeah, she had
We had
all
that
the
plan.
time.
Sounds like you sound like Rulin.
We
And
touched.
we had a two-story house, an old frame one that we'd fixed up in Orlando when he was just a little boy, just like that. And we had some good friends, members of the church, that had a girl his age. And she was just fiery redheaded, Beverly Ann Ritchie. And we used to teasing Rulin about getting married to some Beverly Ann or something. And one day he said he was going to marry Beverly Ann Ritchie and live upstairs in that apartment.
Never leaving home.
Never leaving home.
This was Rainier?
Rulin. We better.
Well, we appreciate this. Now, you young boys can all watch out. This is a proper turkey imitation. And it helps if you kind of get in the mood and make yourself think like you're a turkey. Oh.
Was he acting like a turkey?
No, no.
Well, what's he doing then?
Do a hen. You better show me so I can get at it. That's pretty good.
We're making fools of ourselves.
Oh, we have a video camera to do it in front of.
Good evening. We're going to have opening quill by Grandpa. Would you like to? Okay. Grandpa's going to say the opening quill. And what's the opening song going to be?
First Noel.
The First Noel. And Terrence B. Young's
Well, you can't do it.
On me. No.
There, how's that?
Perfect.
Okay, is it Kara's turn again?
Yeah.
Carrie gets to put another one on.
Oh, back. One more. Me.
Swing around there.
Me? Me?
Very good,
Here comes
Grandpa.
John. Oh, I thought it was your turn. Yes, me. Our turn. Me. Me? You too.
There, how's that? So it's makes you feel bad because that was a good store to get things from.
No.
Okay, Allison,
I made this one.
you did?
That's
It's really cute. But you didn't make it from a doily?
Oh, she
Funny
made
they
it
don't
brownies,
get one in
didn't you?
Tremont, but they haven't.
What?
We haven't,
Oh.
they haven't got anything like that in Tremont.
No, not yet.
If we take these apart, they'll have the ice savers in them,
Oh.
but they'll be stale.
And
Hi, little song. Got you, Gara? The goose is getting back. If you haven't got a penny, then a half penny will do. If you haven't got a